Hello there, friendos, and welcome to another AIP tutorial. In this episode, we're going to be doing some reflecting of titles. So we're going to create this nice little reflection that we have going on here. Now, as I play this back, you can see that it's actually rippling with the water. All right, so without any hesitation, let's get started. But first, I want you to know that you can follow along with this project. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can get all the files that you're going to need. And as usual, those files you can use for whatever purposes you want. They're yours to have. Now they are available for free, but if you want to help support the channel, it gives you the option of naming your own price. And I would like to say to anybody who has given to the channel, to anybody who watches my videos, to the people who like it, to the people who comment, to the people who subscribe, thank you. Genuinely. Thank you. All of your support has really meant a lot and kept me going, and I want to thank you. I appreciate all of you. All right, let's get to the videos now that we got all the sappy stuff out of the way. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring our background plate into a new composition. But before that, I want to show you how you import these, because this is a JPEG sequence. So if you right-click in our project window, go to Import, File, we can select our file. So you can go to wherever you have these files saved to, if you have downloaded them, and we can just click on the first one and make sure Importer JPEG Sequence is checked on. Now you can also do Create Composition. That'll put it into a composition, but I'm not going to do that for now. So from there, with the first one selected and this little guy checked on, let's hit open. I already did that, so I'm going to cancel that. All right, so we have our background plate. Now, if you want to change the frame rate of this, you can right-click on the footage, go to Interpret Footage, Main. And here we can assume the frame rate of whatever we tell it. So we're going to take our background plate footage and put it into a new composition. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually pre-compose our background plate. So we can do this a number of ways. We can right-click on it, go down to Pre-Compose, and select that, and we can pre-compose it, or we can hit Shift-Command-C and pre-compose it. Let's change the name to BG, just simple. And we also want to make sure that Move All Attributes into New Composition is selected here. The reason for that is if we added an effect on top of this and then pre-composed it, it would put the actual footage inside the composition, but leave that effect on the outside of it. With this option, what it will do is take the effect and the footage and put that inside of the composition. Now, like I said, in this instance, it's not really that important, but just so you know, the more you know. So we got our background image. Now it's time for our text. I'm going to right click down in here, go to New, Text, and I'm going to type in Lake Hammond. All right, so let's set up our characters. So for this, I'm going to use Korolev Compressed Bold. You can get that off the Adobe font page. And let's do this. Let's align this to the center. And now let's go through and just kind of bring this down. Paragraph, I always like to keep this centered. It's not really going to matter too much here, but so back in character, let's change the color of the font. Let's make that white. And you know what? I'm going to put a faux bold on top of the boldness. All right, so we can scale this up. We can you can just mess around with this however you want to make it look. All right, so let's get the move tool going, hit V on the keyboard, or go up here and select that. Let's move that up here, like maybe about there. Let's make this bigger. Let's just keep going. Let's make it as big as we can. There we go. That's good. Maybe align that to the center, make sure it's in there. Yep, still there. So now we have our text. What we want to do now that everything is situated with that is pre-compose it. Shift-Command-C. Now this will automatically select Move All Attributes, and that's good. So we can call this something like maybe Text PC for pre-composition. Now we're going to do some really fancy stuff to create this reflection. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to duplicate our Text PC. We're going to select on it and hit enter. And we're going to rename this to text reflect. There we go. So what we're going to do is hit S to bring up the scale, and we're going to unlock these constraints. That way we can edit the X and the Y separately. So we're going to go and we're going to put -100 in that second position, the X axis. Boom. And let's actually move this down maybe to about here. So what I'm going to do is actually pre-compose this again. So Shift-Command-C, and we can call this flipped or something. I don't know. Once again, move all attributes, otherwise our scale will be put on top of the composition rather than inside of it. And the whole point of precomposing is to get the scale inside. All right, so another thing that we're going to do here is create a mask around our composition. So if we double click on this rectangle tool, we automatically create a mask. I'm going to move this down to about here, and I'm going to hit F on the keyboard to feather it out, and we're going to feather it out a lot. All right, we'll go for about 200. Now, another thing we need to do is take this mask from add to subtract. All right, so we're not really getting a mask on our sides here. That's because of our feather. So what we actually need to do is make our mask bigger. We can do that by double clicking on it. And if we hold down Command and this little corner right here and drag it up, we can scale everything up proportionally. Now from here, we can just move this down, maybe to something like that. Maybe even bring up the feathering a bit. So we got a mask. So the next effect that we're going to be doing, we're going to need to pre-compose this yet again. We have a mask, we have scale, we have position change. We want to keep that all into one composition. So let's Shift Command C, text masked. How about that? We'll just do that. And once again, move all attributes because the previously mentioned, all that other stuff that I mentioned previously, we need to keep that inside of our composition. So text masked. Okay, so now you can see our composition is taking up the whole thing. We don't have any effects on top of it. This is what we want. Now let's get to distorting this reflection to make it a little more integrated into the scene. So the way we're going to do this is actually get the wave information from our original background plate. So let's do this. Let's duplicate our background and let's add a few effects on top of this. By the way, if you want to get to your effects and presets, you can just click up here if you're in the default setting. And we can just type in things like maybe, I don't know, a tint. So we have color correction tint. We can add that on top of our top background. All right, so now we have a black and white image. That's what we want. Now I did point out we can find our effects and presets here. So you can continue doing that. But for the sake of my sanity and time, I'm going to be using FX Console to add effects. But you can always find them over here. Okay, anyway. Let's move on. So now we have our background plate converted into a black and white image. Let's pre-compose that again. Pre-compose. And we're going to call this background disp map. Yeah. On top of our text masked, we're going to add a displacement map. So we can just add that right on top. We're going to take the map layer and we're going to select the disp map of our background. Boom. And we can change these to say red and green. We can change them to luminance. And that will read just from the black and white image. So our max horizontal displacement, we're going to bump that up a bunch. Already you can see how it's affecting it. And we don't want to go up too high here. You know, maybe like 40-ish. Yeah, 40 and maybe 10 on the vertical. Just a little bit of distortion on the vertical, just a little tiny bit. Now these other settings here, the map behavior, center map, stretch map to fit, tile map, we don't need to worry about any of these. None of these will affect the way this works because this is all nice and neat inside of a composition. So we don't need to worry about any of that. Expand output, doesn't matter. This is why I like to pre-compose this kind of stuff. Any effect that uses another layer to achieve its effect, always have that layer that's being read from as a composition. Just a little tip for you. All right, so we can actually poke the eye out of the background displacement map. We don't need to see that. Now another thing that I want to point out here, if we just kind of get rid of all of our text layers, or if actually let's do this. If we go over here to the second column, the little dot thing, we can actually isolate the layers. So rather than poking the eye out of these two, we can just click down here and it will only show the background plate. So the thing that I wanted to point out with this is you can see that this side of the sky, this side of the image is brighter than this side of the image. Now the way a displacement map works is it reads from the black and white data. Black meaning the least amount being affected and white being the most amount affected by that effect. So the brighter parts of her background image are being distorted more than the darker places. That's how this works. Now, we think about this, one side is brighter than the other side. So that means we're not really getting a good displacement map. If we turn on other layers, so what we can do is we can even out the brightness on our layers here. Let's bring this back up to 100% so we can see what we're doing. So let's go into our displacement map background, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So now what we're going to do is we're going to right click down in here, go to new adjustment layer. And on top of that adjustment layer, we're going to add a curves. All right, so what we want to do is maybe bring down the whites just a little bit and then bring down the darker and the mid-tones and kind of like that. What we're looking for is to try and make this side about the same contrast and darkness of this side. Now it's a little hard to see if we're doing that, if we're accomplishing that. So let's create some masks. We're going to make sure that our adjustment layer is selected and double click on this rectangle tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this about 45 degrees, about the same angle. The sun's kind of to the right and down a little bit. It's closer to morning, I believe. Anyway, so we're going to make this gigantic. All right. We can just make sure that this is completely covering what we need, just like this. All right. Now what we're going to do is hit enter to get out of that and hit F to bring up the feather. Let's feather it out a whole bunch, like really big. Now, one thing to point out about reflections is that we notice that our sky, we have a pretty clear line of, the separation where the gradient starts to happen. And it's kind of diagonal like this, right? So the reflection is actually going to be the complete reverse of that. So we want another mask to go this way because you can see we're starting to get a little dark here, like darker than this. So we actually want to create another mask going the opposite direction. So what we can do is just duplicate that mask, double click on it, and rotate it this way, and kind of bring it over here. And we're going to change this one from add to subtract. There we go. Now we're already looking a lot more even. Now another thing to make it easier to tell the difference between the two masks is we can change the colors. We can do that by clicking on this little icon right here. Boom. Now we have a red one and a purple one. Or, if you want to go with magenta. So one thing I want to do is add another curves on top of our background. And here I'm just going to, now keep in mind, we really only have to focus on the water because the sky is not really, it's not going to really matter. So we can up the contrast for this if we want, if we choose to. Maybe go back into our adjustment layer because we can see that we're still a little brighter on the left hand or right hand side. I know my directions. Shh. So we can bring this down, something like that. We don't need it to be perfect, but here we go. If we go back to our background plate, because we upped our contrast, we actually need to bring down the displacement. So let's probably about halve that. So maybe 20 and 5. So one thing we can do to further integrate this into our scene is to add a tint on top of our text masked. And we can change the white. We can actually select maybe this. Maybe bring down the saturation a little bit. Turn up the brightness. We just want a little bit of that color coming in. Something like that. Now this looks all a little too jaggedy right here. So what I'm going to do is add a fast box blur. And we're going to repeat edge pixels to make sure that even the edges are blurred, but we don't really need it, whatever. And let's just bump up. 1 is too much, maybe 0.5. Maybe turn down the iterations to 2. I mean, we don't want it to be like blurry, like we got vision problems, but we want just enough of a blur to just kind of make it less jaggedy. All right, guys, that's it. That's the video. I showed you what I wanted to show you. Now, I'm sure there's other things we can do to take this even further. All right, and again, if you want to help support the channel, hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, do all the things. And again, to those of you who watch my videos, thank you. Again, I literally cannot thank each and every one of you enough. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.